morning. Welcome to the Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host on this weekly program. It's a great privilege I always have to meet with you each week to introduce to you a convert or someone who's come back to the Catholic Church to talk about their journey. And I'm very privileged tonight to introduce to you James Likoudis. Now, many of you probably have seen him on EWTN before. He's been on Mother's program. And he's going to talk about his journey from the Greek Orthodox Church. And it's exciting because many of you have given me emails or letters asking if I'll have a convert from the Orthodox Church. And up to this point, I have not had one. So I've looked forward to Jim's presence with us on this program. And remember, you're an important part of this program, so start getting your questions and emails ready to put to Jim later in the program. The phone number, if you'd like to call us, is 1-800-221-9460. And if you'd like to email us, it's journeyhome@ewtn.com. Jim, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Marcus.
And you say you watch the program once in a while at home.
It's a great program.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. Sometimes our guests have never seen the program before because where they live, they don't have the dish or they don't have the cable. But you're able to see the program, so you know a little bit of what's like to be on the other side, and now you're here with me on this side, ready to take their calls for you. I'm a great privilege to have you on the program because Orthodoxy is one of the issues that many converts explore a bit as they consider the Catholic faith. And there's much confusion about the two churches, Catholic, Orthodox. And there's confusion about Eastern Rite, the Catholic Church. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But why don't you start by giving us a summary of your early spiritual journey?
Well, Marcus, I was brought up in Lackawanna, New York, famous for Bethlehem steel, and also Father Baker's magnificent basilica, which is rather interesting because in Lackawanna, New York, Monsignor Nelson Baker founded this magnificent church, built it. He died at the age of 96. His cause for beatification has been opened. So Lackawanna is certainly famous for Father Baker, perhaps a future blessed. And there were a number of Catholic schools in Lackawanna. I was born to Greek immigrant parents who came to this country right after World War I. My father was a soldier in the Greek army. He'd been kept there too long. He wanted to come to the United States. So they were Greek Orthodox. They came from a little island off the west coast of Greece called Kefalonia. And my earliest memories were of the magnificent Greek liturgy in the Greek Orthodox Church in Buffalo, New York. And going to public school, I was sort of interested in religion. I wanted to know more about my own faith. And I was impressed by the Catholic schools and the Catholic youngsters who went to those schools, insofar as they were getting a religious education that I wasn't getting because it was very difficult to travel into Buffalo from Lackawanna. My dad didn't drive, and there was no possibility of a formal, let's say, catechesis in Greek Orthodoxy. But I was interested in religion, and so I studied. And frankly was confronted by a problem very early. The Catholics, you see, claimed to be the true church of Jesus Christ. And interestingly enough, the Greek Orthodox claimed to be the true church of Jesus Christ. And obviously, you couldn't have two true churches. When I went to the University of Buffalo and studied philosophy and history there, I spent a lot of time in the library, studying the history of the church and studying the history of the schism between West and East, which gave rise to the separated Eastern churches that separated from Rome. The key date usually is given as 1054, but historians of the 20th century have discovered that really that's not a very good date for the schism. It really occurred later. You really have a serious rupture taking place at the end of the 12th century. By that time, the first attacks on papal primacy were taking place among the Greeks, and this schismatic tendency spread to the Slavs. And so you're really dealing with, you might call, the Greco-Slav churches that form a block of about 16 national churches where you have most Russians, most Serbs, Bulgarians, Albanians, a lot of Romanians, some Arabs in the Middle East, the Greeks. All of them form a block of national churches that for centuries, despite certain reunions that took place in 1274 and 1439, you have a more, let's say, a solidified separation taking place after the repudiation of the Council of Florence in 1439. So you have a very tragic episode in church history here, the separation of these patriarchal churches of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, these old historic churches, plus their daughter churches, you might say, that for many centuries have been separated from the See of Peter. That's probably the greatest tragedy in the history of the church.
Well, back when you were studying this in college, you were still Greek Orthodox, is that correct? At the time, had you already gone through your transition in thinking, or did you still have an Orthodox way of looking at the Catholic Church at that point?
Yes, there was a period in where I was very hostile to the Catholic Church, simply because I read a number of Orthodox writers and polemicists. And, of course, their major point was that the Catholics had separated from the Greek Church. And the first 1,000 years of Christian history had no evidence of the universal jurisdiction of the Pope over the entire Church, both East and West. My study
of
history,
perspective, yeah.
So I paid special attention to the history of the papacy itself. And reading the writings of Popes Julius and Innocent, Leo I, Gregory I, Gelasius.
When were they?
They would be in the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries.
Right.
I remember, and you see this among a number of Orthodox writers today, they keep insisting for the first 1,000 years there is no evidence of the papacy as we know it. And of course, my own study of history indicated this was simply not true, because if you read the writings of the popes themselves long before the schism, hundreds of years before the schism, there is no question what they believed their role in the church was. The Pope considered himself to be the successor of the Apostle Peter, who was given an office in the church, to be the rock of the church, to be the holder of the keys of the kingdom of heaven, to be the confirmer of his brethren, and to be the chief shepherd of the church, where our Lord said to him after the resurrection, "Feed my lambs, feed my sheep." One of the words in Greek is actually rule. Rule my lambs and sheep.
During this time, then, when you were examining these things, was it this particular issue that, for you to be a lifelong Orthodox, to confront with these things you were discovering in history, was it a shattering thing for you at the time? What did it do to your family? And is that when you converted while you were in college? Or?
It was a sort of complex scene at university. I was sort of a kind of crypto-Catholic while on campus, because the Catholic Church was coming. These were the days of Paul Blanchard and the rise of secular humanism and secularism among academics. And the Catholic Church was taking a beating at that time on campus. The campus newspaper was not very friendly to the church. And I was sort of sympathetic to Catholicism after my reading. And one of the things that perhaps is interesting for those who are listening, it was the writings of Cardinal Newman and Cardinal Manning, Thomas William Allies, Henry Wilberforce, converts from Anglicanism, who had a great grasp of the history of the Church and who were great defenders of papal supremacy, papal primacy. And it was quite obvious from reading their works and reading the original writings of the popes themselves that the Pope was more than just the first among equals. He just didn't have a primacy of honor. Yes, he had a primacy